Today we're talking Stonehenge, which rocks. And so, sorry about that. All right, so when I started my research for Stonehenge, I truly had no idea what it was all about, and I realized that Stonehenge is about 80 miles southeast of London. It's in a small area called the Salisbury Plain, and what I didn't understand when I first delved into the project is that how is this collection of rocks that are arranged in a circular or semicircular, depending on who you're talking to, arrangement, how are they still relevant, and how is there still discrepancy over its origin, its meaning, the people who built it, all of this. So I just kind of analyzed it from as many angles as I could to try and speculate exactly what I could decipher from my research. And what I determined is that this collection of rocks, Stonehenge, is about 4,000 years old. And through inconclusive data that has allowed for all these different perspectives to continue to be presented, there are many, many, many different concepts about Stonehenge's historic, origins and meaning behind it. So diving right in, it's constructed of stones, and it's widely accepted that many more stones than we see today were originally in the structure, and have since either fallen or been eroded or not seen as prominently as the stones that we see today. But some of these stones are known as sarsens, and they can be so massive that they are 30 feet tall and they can weigh more than 25 tons. So this is obviously adding to the speculation that Neolithic peoples couldn't have undergone this project. However, many recent studies show that there were ways that they could have transported these stones, and some experiments were run by Mike Parker Pearson, sorry about that, who ran a very in-depth study about the rock structures in Stonehenge, and he's from the University of Sussex, I believe, and he determined through some experiments with his team that there is a concept that could have been used where they made circular stones acting as a type of wheel, or just they would roll these massive boulders. Obviously, this would still take many, many years, and that explains the span of construction that was required to create Stonehenge and the monument it is today. It's rumored that, or it's speculated that Stonehenge took thousands of years to complete its construction, and it actually took many, many stages. So in that first So in that first phase of construction, like I was saying, Stonehenge was actually, so this is when the ground was prepared for all of these stones. So in that first phase of construction, it's safest to date it back to 3100 BC. That's when this henge was built. And when I say the henge, that's talking about the ditch that was about 6 feet deep and spanned about 360 feet in diameter. And that was the preparation for where these stones would be placed. And according to archaeologist John Aubrey, who discovered them in the 17th century, about 56 dug pits about 3 feet in diameter were presumed to have been prepared to be filled with either upright bluestones or wooden upright beams. And so this initial stage of construction is said to have been the preparatory ground for what we would know as the collection of stones in this circular formation. Now, the second phase of construction is understood to have taken place about at least 100 to 200 years later. Some evidence that was uncovered shows that significantly more wooden posts were added to the site, as well as possibly a covered structure in the center of the circle. Also during this site, it became apparent through excavations that this site at Stonehenge was used as a burial ground. And this has been rumored for a while, but the dates and the placement of which period of time and who was using it as a burial site were under question. And it's presumed after more archaeological digs that this second stage of construction, about 100 to 200 years after the first, is when people first started being buried at Stonehenge. So this was proof through the uncovering of remains, many of which were cremated remains. And so the ashes were actually spread into those dug holes that I talked about just shortly. And there were more than 25 different cremated remains that were discovered to be buried in the smaller pits at this phase. And this is from a site conducted by Dr. German. And then the last phase of construction, the next one, did not occur for at least 400 to 500 years after this second phase, where they first discovered the burial grounds and wooden posts and the covered structure. And it's reason to have taken the longest amount of time. It was during this phase that the rest of the blue stones were arranged. And this was such a difficult task to undertake because if you've been to the site, you see that the stones that are used to create the monument, there are none like that in the direct vicinity within 100 miles of the site. So they had to travel expansive distances in order to bring these specific stones to the site to create this monument for themselves. So that's why this one took the most amount of time. It was no small feat for these peoples to undertake this. So this is when the massive sarsen stones were also placed in the outer ring of the circle with the blue stones in the interior. So the sarsen stones were also capped with lintel stones. And that gives it the pie-esque kind of shape. You know, it's like a structure type of design that they were going for, and that's what creates all the the familiar Stonehenge look in photos that we see today. So it was at the end of this phase also there were dug exterior ditches, which extended all the way down to the Avon River to the south. Now just to dive into, away from the digs and the archaeological finds and more into the folklore and the pseudo-scientific speculations involving this archaeological site and the reason why it's still even relevant today. So Stonehenge's origin. From the get-go, Stonehenge has been speculated to be something that involved fantastic or magical involvement in its both in its construction and in its meaning and in its uses. Some of those include that through British folklore that Merlin, the wizard Merlin, was actually involved in creating Stonehenge, and this was permeated by one of the original historians of British history, and he added to the folklore. It was not determined that his piece and it was called the Britannia Historia. This is Geoffrey of Monmouth. It was not determined that his piece about British history and origin was pseudoscientific until hundreds to thousands of years after he published the piece. And so this obviously started to be cemented in people's minds that this was the most logical conclusion and the most logical explanation of some of the story. It's also nationalistic, and obviously the people at the time really related to the concept that they were able to be a part of that. And some of the other ideas and ridiculous concepts about Stonehenge would be that aliens were involved in its creation. And while this sounds super exciting, I was unable to uncover any kind of basis for these claims. I hope you learned something about Stonehenge today, and thanks for your time.